Hello and welcome. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late starting the stream tonight. Hello to the replay squad as well. Thank you very much for tuning in after the fact. Today we've got a bit of an interesting one for you. I'm going to be designing something from scratch. It's going to be a serverless SaaS application that I'm maybe planning on building myself. I'm not 100% sure yet, but we're going to go through and design the application. I'll give you a few the requirements and stuff of what I'm thinking, and then we'll take it from there. So I'm going to jump into it if I can get the screen out right. There you go. Okay, so for my serverless SaaS application, there's basically two things that I'm going to want to build out, at least initially. And if we've got time, I'll add in some more features and stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to build out DNS plus HTTP monitoring. And what we're going to do for this application is I want it to be able to trigger around the world. So that's kind of like requirement number one. I'm going to document it over here on the right. So I'm going to want it multi-region from the start. I'm going to want it to cost as little as possible. What else do I want? Obviously some form of payment system in place, payment and billing. And that's going to be it for now. So if I think about where and how I kind of want to monitor this, I have no idea why that is being a little bit silly. Let's try that again. So if I think about where I want to host this, so if that's our kind of requirements over in that corner, I want to host it in the EU, in the US, Asia, probably something in MENA as well, at least to start off with. And this gives me nice global coverage for my monitoring solution that I'm going to build. Obviously, we could have multiple points of presence inside of Europe. It's not, at least to start off with, to save costs. Don't particularly want every single region in Europe, but we can definitely go into that depth a little bit more. And the other one is South America. Okay, that's obviously going to carry on playing up. So if we're going to talk about these as from the regions, we need to have a multi-region design. Don't think there's any other particular requirements that I've got here. I think this is going to be quite a straightforward SaaS solution here. So let's get cracking into it. So at the core of whenever we want somebody to sign up to our SaaS, we have to have some kind of access solution. So for me, I'm going to be basing this on AWS Cognito. So why AWS Cognito? Partly because of cost, because one of my requirements here is to keep costs low. So with AWS Cognito, I get a free tier, which means I can get up and running and do a lot of development really, really easily. I can also set up advanced features later on, such as, the classic enterprise level features should I want to. So if this does turn into something pretty awesome, which I hope it does, then I can, push that through to enterprise level features later on. And it also means as well, if I start running any Lambdas, which I'm probably going to do quite a lot of, then this will be able to talk with Lambdas quite nice and easily through Lambda authorizers. So that brings me on to two parts, which I'm going to need a front-end UI for this solution. And we're going to need a back-end API. So for our UI, I'm probably going to statically host this with CloudFront, maybe. There's nothing going to be too dynamic here. I don't need to dynamically draw pages. It's going to be quite simple. It will probably be Blazor underneath. We'll put a question mark there. Something that I need to investigate a little bit more around the front end side of stuff and what technologies exactly I want there. But for the backend API, this is going to be hosted on Lambda and probably going to have an API gateway in front of here as well. So this is AWS's API gateway. That's going to go into my Lambda, and then we'll obviously off between the two here as well. Now, from a costing perspective, I do need to go and double check to make sure API gateway or the costing of that is versus AWS load balancer for the solution. It's not something I've done before the stream, so I'll have to go and check that out. But ultimately, I want to keep these costs kind of low, so whichever is the cheaper option is likely the one I'm going to pick for this one, because I don't need any advanced functionalities from API gateway. Like, I don't need to serve Swagger REST endpoints or anything like that. I can do all that through the Lambda API. And being a C# dev, that's going to be ASP.NET Core sitting in there in the background. And that'll be our main API surface. Obviously, that's going to need some kind of persistence as well. So I think there's going to be two forms of persistence. This is going to need the first one is going to be more of a database solution. And this one here, I'm going to have DynamoDB. And I'll go on to why I'm picking that one in a second. And the other one is S3. So why do I need S3 in the solution? I'm going to start off that one because it's a little bit quicker to go through. Primarily billing focused bits and pieces. So I'm going to have my billing going through something like Stripe. And we'll talk through that a bit later on. But I'm going to want to serve the files out from my API, but I don't want to serve it out directly from S3. I do want to proxy it through my Lambda. I know that you can expose S3 straight to the internet, but I would rather avoid that and limit what can access my S3 bucket. And if you actually watch one of the videos I posted recently about creating time-based endpoints, you can do kind of this proxy access and do a file download scenario. So I'll probably implement something like that to ensure that we've got secure downloads of invoices that people can access not only through the API, but also through the UI and stuff like that. So we'll just send those files directly out to the user from there. And if I do change my mind about where I keep things like invoices and stuff in the future, if I want to dynamically generate them, change buckets, etc., I'm free to change my mind later on. I'm not going to kind of tie download URLs and stuff to specific S3 buckets, which is always good. Sure. So why am I picking DynamoDB is my backing database for my little SLAS monitoring solution. Partly because I want the multi-region capabilities of it. Obviously, I could use Aurora serverless, where I can go global tables and stuff with Aurora. But I'm not going to do that because I want more of a change capture feed, which I can get with Dynamo quite easily. And it also integrates with Lambda really, really easily as well. So that's kind of why I'm going to pick DynamoDB here. So if I think about like the things that I want to store, I'm going to need kind of which domains. I'm going to need like a frequency. I'm going to need kind of the result stored as well of each check. What else? In the future, something I've thought about, you might want to have like a rule condition So you might have some rules to basically say, right, this DNS address has got to match this specific thing, or it's got to be within these values or one of these values and stuff like that. So we can build in some nice rule-based systems here to make sure that the domain is matching what we think it's going to match, and provide kind of that external bits and pieces. So that's kind of the domains. We've got the same for kind of the URLs. Again, it's just going to be frequency. The result. And the rules. We may have some additional config here as well. So we might need a specific authorization header or something like that to go through and say, kind of what happened with that. Future scope, one thing we could do, since we're hitting these URLs anyways, we could offer kind of a screenshotting service to say, what did the page look like at this time? That should be something that's really easy to do on top of that. So we've got our domains, we've got our URLs. We're going to need some form of notifications. That would be awesome. And last but not least, we probably want to store some billing information. But what do I need? Anything particular around that? I don't. I'm unsure about the billing, whether it's going to be in Dynamo or more leaning towards a time series database, for a few different reasons. So I might come back to billing in a bit. So if we can probably deploy everything that we've got there so far in all the regions. Anything I need to check on Cognito to see about its multi-region capabilities. I don't know if it's a global resource or if it is limited to a single region. I would need to go and check that. But most of this stuff, like the Lambdas, the API Gateway, CloudFront, DynamoDB, S3, all works in multi-region. So I'm covering off my requirements over here quite nicely. So that is great from that perspective. So we kind of said on the left here that we want our domains and our URLs to be scanned on some kind of frequency. In my head, I've got this down as cron expressions. So we can kind of determine at certain points in time, set frequencies, and we can build differently depending on how many times people want to be called. If you want to be called every minute, yeah, we can 100% do that, but it's going to cost you to do that. So let's have a look at how I would kind of look at building out this frequency part of things. So at the core of the solution, I would have EventBridge. Because with EventBridge, one of the things that we can do is we can put a rule on here that says trigger on this cron expression. And if we trigger on the cron expression, we can then scan the table that we've got for everything that matches that frequency and the last time something was accessed and bits and pieces like that. So we'll have our Lambda function that gets triggered on our rule. And that Lambda will go to our global instance of the database to basically get URLs and domains that we need to check. Once that is done, we can, so if that's kind of like step one of our process, and the result is coming back, step two of our process, we can publish something to EventBridge for another Lambda to pick up. So kind of, it's going to be a bit of a sprawling diagram from now on, but so we're going to have another Lambda down here that's going to start talking to maybe Cloudflare's DNS over HTTPS. We might have Google's one as well. For example, we may have another EventBridge Lambda over here. That might be just our HTTP guy, and that's going to go off out to our user's website. And this way we've kind of got a nice separation of what is going on between our DNS level stuff and our HTTP level stuff. Now, to make this work multi-region, we would have to set up the rule in each region, which means we're going to need an event bridge in each region. So don't think you can have a single event bridge that spans regions yet. And that kind of actually works in our favor anyway, because we can isolate different rules and stuff to different regions. So that's something I forgot to add onto here is which regions do we want? And the design of the database, we kind of haven't gone through. But we've got our regions on both our URLs and our domains. So then we kind of got the section over here where we're in, say, the South America, one of the South America regions. The event bridge rule is triggering. We go off and get the URLs and domains from our region local copy of DynamoDB. It goes back, publishes that onto EventBridge to say, I don't know, URL check requested or something like that. And then it will go through to the right Lambda, whether it's a DNS or HTTP one. And it would go and go and basically do the check and to say, right, here is the results. So following down the HTTP flow for now, that's kind of like step 3. Then the result, we want to go into kind of step 4, which I think makes a lot of sense. We're publishing everything back to the event bridge. We can then start recording the results. Now, how we record the results is kind of up to us. We can either write back the results not only to EventBridge so that everybody gets it, but we then have a choice of where do we put this data afterwards. From a UI perspective, we do want to have some graphs showing kind of latency. We want status pages and stuff like that to kind of show uptime, whether it's up or down or failed and all that kind of stuff. So this is why I was leaning earlier towards a time series database, because I can store some of the records in there to say this URL ID was accessed for this customer. It took this amount of time, or this DNS record with this provider took this amount of time. That kind of stuff would suit quite nicely into a time series database. I can squash, I can aggregate it. And there's some really cool things I've been looking at in the last week or so with TimeStream around pre-aggregation of data inside of TimeStream. If you're not aware of what TimeStream is, it's AWS's time series database. From the looks of things, it seems to be pretty cost effective until you get to really, really, really large scale. So probably not going to reach that, at least not in the next year. So I'm not worried about the cost on that one for now. But if we're writing it to our time series database, we can then start producing nice, pretty graphs for our UI, which we've got above here. So I'm just going to realize this is quite a messy design, but I want to keep this for later on. So with my event bridge, if we assume that the starting point for this section of the diagram is I've just finished my HTTP request. And I want to go back to EventBridge. That's kind of step 1. So I will likely actually dual write to two different places. So I'll have one Lambda here. Lambda. And this is going to write to DynamoDB. And the reason why it's going to write to DynamoDB is as part of this HTTP kind of status result, I'm thinking about capturing at least like the headers and the response payload from the result and storing that with the overall result of like what's the status code, what kind of values and all that kind of stuff. Then with that, we can pump that through, store it in DynamoDB, and we can retrieve that later on the UI, which is great. Great from a debugging perspective of, hey, I received this alert, but why did this alert trigger? Oh, okay, it returned me a 401. Okay, why did it return me 401? Oh, I've changed some config somewhere and it's all messed up. That key was actually being used. Something like that. That stuff always happens. So being able to debug that from our perspective is really great. We can also put things like trace IDs as well. So we want to capture all that information, but we don't necessarily want to store that in a time series database. So our second part of my little dual write. So I'm going to call that number 2 and number 3. So number 3, we are going to write to another database. But this is time stream. And this is going to store basically what the result classification was. So was it successful or did it fail? I'm not going to go into details in time stream. We don't want to pay for the extra storage on there, considering we're going to store the other stuff in DynamoDB. We just need to know, was it successful or not? How long did it take? And kind of how to uniquely identify it. So there's only going to be 3 or 4 fields in here. Because like I said, we'll have some scheduled queries in here. So we're going to see like 99th percentile, like 95th, and we can pre-aggregate these as much as we want. So if we grab those percentiles as a scheduled query, I saw a talk last night, actually, when I was thinking about this design a little bit. And with the scheduled queries in TimeStream, I think they took one of their processing or queries that were processing from, I think it was like 38 seconds down to 300 milliseconds on quite a large data set. It was like in the terabytes of data, and they queried it in like 300 milliseconds to get the aggregation because of the scheduled query. Did all the hard work in the background for them. And I thought, that is great. And looking at it, if it reduced the overall costs overall in terms of latency and the overall monetary cost associated with it, I am all good with that. So this is where the design starts to get a bit interesting, because we have 2 different, one thing I'd like to consider is I don't think TimeStream is a global resource, i.e. we can't set up like a global table as we can DynamoDB or Aurora. So we do have to think about, right, how do we access stuff globally but only have one time series database? So I'm thinking that we come up with 2 different region types to go and process this. So we'll first of all have a primary region. And this is where we're going to do most of our data processing. So this is what's going to hold the time series database. And then we'll likely have to have an edge region. And what do I mean by edge region? So this is one of the other regions that I've got up here. So if our primary region is the EU, then our edge regions will be US, Asia, MENA, and South America. And how does the architecture differ between what we've got in our primary region and what we're going to have in our edge region? So for me, I would still have an EventBridge instance. I would still have my Lambda that writes to DynamoDB. Just finish off the writing. But then I would probably call that it on the edge region. There is a scenario where we do want to do notifications, and I wonder, from an aggregation perspective, would you want to do notifications from the edge or from the primary region? Now, if for whatever reason the primary region goes down, we lose some stuff on the UI. Okay, it's not great, but the actual system that's monitoring, i.e. the Lambda functions from the other part of our diagram over here, this stuff keeps on working. And this would be in an edge region here, this kind of monitoring stuff. Because we'd have access to our global table, the Lambda functions will be region local as well, which would be great. So would we want our notification system to be at the edge? Initially, I'm going to say no for my SaaS to keep it simple. I will eventually take a look at kind of this core system here where we've got CloudFront, which is going to be global, big gateway and stuff like that. We may, in fact, I can just call back into the API and trigger a notification, because if we're going to do this on, we're going to have like Route 53 in there anyway. So yeah, let's just draw this out. So the other thing, if that's like number one that comes off, the second thing that's going to come off here. So we still have our Lambda to say, hey, right, we've breached a rule. So to notify it, we can actually go back to our API. Now we have to figure out how to do the authorization for that API, but we could probably do that with IAM authentication, so we don't have to deal with any keys. I'm just going to note that down there. And the way this works with IAM authentication, so what you can do on the API gateway, which is this lovely little component right here in the center of the screen now, is you can basically say, I want you to do IAM authentication into this API gateway as one of your like kind of reference points. And then once you've done that, you can then grant roles access and stuff like that. I would have to see whether you can run dual authorizers for different endpoints. But yeah, that might actually, yeah, we can, because I can just have it on an internal endpoint. So yeah, we can run IAM authentication here, and yeah, go from there. And hello, Danji. Yes, it has been a very long time, dear mate. How you doing? So yeah, that IAM approach would work, and that kind of gives us our notifications. And my writing is terrible, but I'll understand what that means afterwards. So yeah, because API Gateway will be our global resource, we can obviously, not obviously, but we can use a feature inside of Route 53 where you can do health checks on endpoints and do region-based failovers as well, which is awesome. So long as we've got our API Gateway set up in the correct way, we can authorize the kind of the notification Lambda, which is this guy over here. We can say all the notification lambdas, regardless of the region, so long as they're from my account, can go and talk to my API gateway at an IAM level. We don't have to deal with any API keys, which is awesome. Zero trust for the win. So what am I scoping out? Good question. So basically, I'm taking a look at an idea that I've had for a DNS and HTTP monitoring solution. There's a bunch of other stuff that I want to do after this, in terms of like incident response, architecture monitoring, rule-based navigations and stuff like that. But I'm starting out with, right, if I'm going to build something, that's build something minimal that I can get up off the ground and running pretty quickly. So I'm going to start out with basic DNS and HTTP monitoring before I start adding some of the advanced stuff later on. So we're going to just basically track DNS records. Hey, do these match what we think they should match? URLs, should they match what we think they should match? We'll have some kind of notification system in there, and we'll have billing in there as well. So for the primary stuff, I'm going to have Cognito API gateway from AWS with Lambda and CloudFront. Nothing too magical there for configuring all this stuff. And then we get into the nitty gritty, which is how do I, if I'm going to monitor DNS or HTTPS from different regions, how do I go about doing that? And this is kind of the left-hand side of the screen here now, is what we would do to put into an edge region to actually do the monitoring. So we trigger something from EventBridge, picks up the rule, we're going to get the configuration, and then we pass the configuration back to say, hey, we've asked for this thing to be checked. And then it'll go and actually do the checking and publish the result. And then this is where we're just starting to get onto with the primary and edge regions, where for the billing purposes, we only really want one place in our architecture that captures a lot of the billing information. So we're going to base that on AWS TimeStream. This is what we can call our primary region. And then our edge regions is kind of what I just discussed, but this is the second side of things of like, once we've got the result of like the DNS or the HTTP request, what do we do from there? Like, how do we continue on and how do we do notifications? Because the billing side of things would basically be taken care of by writing into DynamoDB, and then we can use a change feed from that for additional stuff if we need to, but otherwise it's taken care of by TimeStream. So yeah, I had a little debate about notifications, where I should do them. Should I do them at the edge locations where the things are getting triggered from, or should I do it from a central place? They're going to be triggered initially from the edge, but I can use some of the adaptive architecture because a lot of the stuff I'm trying to use is multi-region focused. I'm going to push it out through Route 53 onto the notification endpoint from there. Hopefully that catches you up nice and quickly. Okay, so given that in mind, what we're going to use for our notifications backend, or what do we need? So I think I'm going to need three things out the back of this. I think one is going to be standard email, SMS. You could argue voice as well. Put a question mark next to that. I don't think that's something I would initially implement. And then the good old webhook. Ooh, thinking about it. For a notification system, there is a really cool thing that AWS does now with EventBridge called partner events. And I've not set it up from a publisher side, but I wonder if we can do some EventBridge to EventBridge communication there. so long as it's in the same region where we're publishing the notifications from, it should be fine. It's a good thing. I'll have to check into that partner events. I probably won't put it as first thing anyway, to be honest. I probably wouldn't put voice in. I'll go put a question mark by SMS as well. I probably wouldn't do that for an initial version. I'll probably be looking at emails. So the default, I guess, would be SendGrid here. Webhook we can implement ourselves through Lambda. We'll probably back it off with like SQS or something first, and then just have the retry policies and stuff like that in place from Lambda. If I was going to do SMS and voice, I would probably go via Twilio to do that as well. And then that all kind of covers everything that we got in terms of notifications for everyone. So I think that would be good from a notification perspective. And to be honest, that's pretty much a core architecture for a monitoring-based service. A very simple one, admittedly. There's a whole bunch that we would need to configure here in terms of retry policies and stuff like this, and how long should we wait if we can't contact it? Like, should we even retry if we can't get to the user's endpoint? A few more complicated things like if they want us to connect over VPNs, then, or private link endpoints and stuff like that. I think we can deal with that another time. Because that's just some VPC configuration. This definitely wouldn't be needed or supported in the very first versions of this, because there's going to be a lot of custom bits and pieces and provisioning that's going to have to happen for that. So that's the kind of like the main bit. Just check my little notes. So the other bit I'm going to go into now is, right, if I'm going to expand this beyond domains and URLs, and I'm going to go into it through architecture monitoring. And this is where I've had some really cool ideas. So I think for the majority of things, it will probably work in a similar way to this section down here. So I'm just going to redraw that. So we'll have this is our Dynamo table that we had above. This is going to have our configuration in there. We'll have our event bridge. And our Lambda that sits in between. So if we've got our standard kind of access pattern here, and this is to do the architecture monitoring. So basically what I'm looking at implementing here is to say, on a given frequency, get me all the EC2 servers. Once I've got all the EC2 servers, for each EC2 service, do they match a specific rule set? And I want to let the users define this rule set. And there's something called Open Policy Agent, which you may or may not be aware of, which you can basically define a load of JSON, and then you can give it a load of rules and say, does this JSON match these rules? And it does that really, really well. And I decided to try and re-implement something very, very similar in .NET. And it's actually already on my GitHub page, which you can go and try and find if you want to go and find. It's under the aspect repo. And the premise from that is I want users to be able to define kind of what do they consider good architecture and bits and pieces. I'll provide some default rules that people can go and just enable. But for every kind of resource that you want, so you got EC2, you got S3, Lambdas. I'll cover all the popular ones first and then work my way out to the edge ones. But for all these resources, like kind of how do you know that it's well architected, or what's your own rule set? You might want to say like, I want these things tagged and compliance policies and all that kind of stuff, right? So if I start configuring that in my lovely Dynamo configuration table and it gets triggered onto a rule, how from there am I going to do stuff? So we know that we're going to have kind of this little loop between the Lambda. So I'm going to go through the flow as I'm kind of thinking about it. So one is like the event has now started, or like a discovery has started. And I think for each one of these services that's at the top, like EC2, S3, Lambda, we're going to need a discovery Lambda. So I'm just going to call that DL for now. And we're going to have loads of these. One for different types of services. And they're going to take their results and they're going to push it back to EventBridge. Then step 3, we'll have our, how do you describe this? Inspection Lambda. Which is going to need configuration source of like Dynamo. And this inspection Lambda, that's the thing that's going to be running the rule set over here. So it's going to pick up the configuration for whatever object is coming through the discovery Lambdas, and it's going to run the inspection and keep things consistent, all publish stuff back. That then, once it's done its discovery, we'll hook on to this system in the primary. So we'll follow the same solution that is if we're at the edge, we'll publish down into Dynamo. Any failures will go back through the Lambda and notification system for the edge regions. And then when the primary region picks up the Dynamo resources, so I forgot to put the CDC in here. Once we pick up the change data capture feed, we'll inject directly into the Lambda from, or the time stream database from there. So that gives us a nice little loop. We do our discovery, we do our inspection, we publish the results. And because we publish, oh, that's the point. That will be the last step in here. We haven't actually written down the publish. And this is our Edge Lambda again. Lambda. Sorry, it's been a long day and I cannot write today. That will essentially publish up there. That kind of gives us a nice little loop between discovery, inspection, publishing to our local database, and only in fact, I'm going to change some of my design because I don't think I need, if I'm always writing to Dynamo from every single region, and I got my change data capture feed, I don't need to hook off of EventBridge here. So let's just pretend that doesn't exist anymore. And we're going to make our Lambda come off the change data capture feed. So it doesn't matter where the information comes from per se, just that we actually capture that information. And that will go to the Lambda into the time stream database. And that will be a primary only service, I think. Put that primary only, so I know that for later on. Okay, so I guess the only that was actually way easier than I thought it was going to be. I've got a whole complicated design that I scribbled down like 6 or 7 weeks ago. That was way more complicated than this and uses a bunch of SQS, but the use of EventBridge here simplifies stuff massively in terms of number of resources and bits and pieces. So we just need to make sure that we do our mapping between the discovery lambdas and the actual resources itself. We could create just one giant one, but as I think we just want to go through and say, like, right, go and expand it out over time, and have nice deployable little units, maybe off of them on a repo or something like that, so they can share a common code base. But otherwise, individual lambdas and bits and pieces. So, assuming that'll take me 3 or 4 months to build out. Payments is the one bit that I said I was going to cover as well. So we're looking at this primary region here. And I think the way that you would do it is, I'm going to base this off of EventBridge again. I'm literally only for the cron expressions. Makes it really nice and easy. I don't need anything to run more than what it needs to. And so we'll have a cron of like, I don't know, let's call it every month. Every month we're going to run my lambda. And that lambda is going to need access to that time stream database. Wow. And it can do that so we can get the billing. Get the billing for that month. I guess then we'll need to. So if that's step 1, this is step 2. And then step 3, once we got all that information, we actually need to split out into 2 different paths, I think. No, actually, no, we don't. First thing we want to do is generate the report. And that's going to go to S3, so we can download it from later on. And we'll have to look at storage tiers, like whether it's going to be infrequently accessed and stuff or not. And then once that's done, it's kind of step 4 in my process. Step 5 is to say, like, the report is generated, except it's not going to come from the Lambda. I want to use the S3 change notification to do that, I think. That tells us that the object's in the bucket. We can associate metadata with that and have a nice folder structure around S3. And then when that's done, we then need to do 2 things in parallel, potentially. And this is where my knowledge of something like Stripe doesn't help me. I can build Stripe, but I don't know how Stripe works. It's kind of irony. So just going to call it a Stripe here. It's probably what I would use for billing. If you do know anything that's like super simple to do kind of ad hoc billing of people, then please let me know. That'll be amazing. That'll do to Stripe, and then somehow that'll notify the user. And we can, assumingly, we can attach some information like the S3 report link and stuff like that. So yeah, because we'll be able to access and give them like an itemized breakdown of like exactly how many requests that we've been doing, how many were successful, how many were unsuccessful. What's kind of like, if you wanted like a request breakdown for absolutely everything, we could definitely do that. Now, the one thing we kind of didn't talk about, which I do need to consider from a cost perspective, is the data in DynamoDB that's going to kind of live up here. Yes, we're going to have a lot of configuration data, but that's not going to be the bulk of where our storage cost is going to be. Because if we're talking about doing a check every minute for a domain or a URL, that's a couple of thousand records a day. Especially for a number of URLs, we can make this data churn out quite quickly. So if we can keep it live in the database for I don't know, call it 7 days. I think it's reasonable to be able to see anything from the last 7 days out of the API. But if you want it longer than that, then we can actually archive into S3 here. And then look at the storage tiers that's associated with that. And to do that, we can use the change data capture feed to archive data into S3, and we can do a nice hierarchical order based on customers and stuff like this. So if we needed to go and get a load of data back, or they needed like a specific record, then we can go back and go and get it. Or we can temporarily, from a support aspect, go and restore it in DynamoDB, extract and restore. So I might have to build a tool for that, but deal with that problem when we come to it. Extract the data, store it into Dynamo again, and it'll be accessible from the API. Obviously apply like a TTL, because we don't want to keep that data forever in Dynamo. But yeah, and then store it in S3 is super cheap. And we can start looking at aggregating that data on like a daily kind of process and stuff like that. Or we could even get a Lambda to go through and aggregate it into a big JSON file or something. Or we can figure out a way of like nicely aggregating that on a per day basis or something like that. So yeah, that is, I think that's pretty much everything that I would want to do. Because everything else, I think, would just be basic CRUD operations with API get around Lambda. I don't think there's going to be anything really interesting in there. So to put it into perspective, some of the other stuff that I've been thinking about with this is incidents. Just helping you manage those. That's basically a load of CRUD operations. What we can do is use the monitoring stuff to start triggering incidents, which is great. We've also got, if you've got an incident, you're going to want to post-mortem. For notification, monitoring, you might want some like around the kind of this stuff, you might want some scheduling. And when I say scheduling, what I mean is like on-call rotas and stuff like that. Cool. So we've got a question here of, wonder what this setup cost per hour on AWS. Cool. So what I said right at the beginning is I needed to keep an eye on costs for this. So it's a great question. Thank you for calling me out on it. And let's go through and answer that question for you now. So a lot of what I'm looking at, I'm going to start off in the same place where I started off drawing the diagram, is everything that I'm looking at here is either got a free tier or is very low cost. So for example, AWS Cognito, I think even if I added enterprise users with like SAML based authentication, I get 53 users a month, which is perfect for bootstrapping. I think it might be 1,000 users with social logins. So imagine I had 10 people sign up and they paid me like £1 per month to monitor their domain. I'm not actually expending anything on AWS at this point to kind of do it, because Cognito is free. Lambda's got a free tier. I would need to check the cost of API gateway to be sure, but I think that's relatively cheap because all the cost is usually in the Lambdas behind the scenes. DynamoDB is an interesting one. There's 2 modes you can run in. Initially, I would run it in pay-as-you-go kind of mode, so I'm not provisioning any read or write units to start off with. What this means is if there's nobody using it for 3 months, then no worries. I'm not actually paying for anything. Nothing's running apart from API gateway, so I might be paying like $20 a month or something like that for it just to sit there and do nothing. Same with S3. I'm not going to be paying for anything if it's in there. And if it is in there, I'm going to be paying peanuts. So I think when I started going through this and looking up some of the costings, I haven't looked up the costings of everything off the top of my head, but I know there's a lot of stuff with free tiers. I think this all comes out about £100 a month if people are using it quite a bit. So I reckon with, if people start looking at a couple of domains or a couple of URLs they want to monitor, depending on, like, we can set up like frequency tiers and stuff like this. If you want it done every minute, it's going to cost you more than if you want it like once an hour or something like that. And we can definitely do that with this kind of stuff. So the most expensive thing is going to be scanning DynamoDB for the configuration and getting that detail. EventBridge, again, I believe there's a free tier, so I get like a couple of thousand events a month for free off of that. I would have to check the outbound pricing for this as well. Yeah, most of this, like, if it's not being used, I'm not going to be paying for basically anything. Stripe, I think you pay when you actually get a payment, so that's fine. Report generation is fine, because CSV works for everyone, right? Again, there's nothing up here. I am just having a look through to see if there's anything that's going to particularly cost. I actually suspect the 2 big cost centers will be over here, at least initially, SendGrid and Twilio. But to be honest, if I call that like $50 a month, that's not bad. Just having a look. TimeStream is pretty cheap as well. I think I costed that out about $20 a month, and Dynamo was about $50. You might have to put a bit more spaces in between your messages. Come through as stars for me, as the alternative to Twilio. But if there is an alternative that's cheaper than Twilio, then great. I haven't done too much research because that was near the end of what I thought about. I'd only really thought about, to be honest, before I started the stream, I only really thought about this primary and edge region concept and how I would make multiple regions kind of work together in parallel. And even whilst I was designing it, like today on stream, I decided to change my mind. So this big squiggly bit here, which I'm going to get rid of now, because that's no longer needed. Let's get rid of that. Yeah, no, I think I got this architecture even with a couple of million Lambda requests a month. I think it was under $100 a month. I think I have to do some initial setup costs like Route 53, maybe. I could get away with actually hosting it on a different DNS provider and not paying anything for AWS on Route 53, at least initially. That might be an option because I've got things like DNS Simple already set up, fully automated with Pulumi. So I can just leverage that and make some updates to the domain from there. CloudFront is the only other one I don't know, but yeah, if I call it like worst case, $150 a month with nobody using it at absolute worst case, I don't think that's bad at all. And this is why I want to design it as a SaaS-based system, or a serverless SaaS-based system, which is why I called the stream the way I've called it, is because serverless is meant to give us the promise of like scale to zero and a whole bunch of other stuff and infinitely scalable. And it also makes my design pretty simple. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of Lambda functions in here. But it's all stuff that would have probably been services anyway. So the alternative design to this would be run it all on Kubernetes and use Kubernetes scheduler to go and do some of the time jobs. And it would have been fine to sit there and do that. We could have written custom pods and stuff to go and look at specific configuration for specific users. But then you have to pay for the underlying compute, and then I'm instantly talking £200 or £300 a month, plus a load balancer, plus all the other bits and pieces. So this definitely makes it way more cost efficient. And with the design, I don't have to run everything everywhere to start off with. Like, I know I want to run in these regions to give some nice global monitoring, but from day one, I can just stick with the EU region. I can stick with one region. I don't have to pay for anything global. And it's kind of perfect. So yeah, really interested to know what that Twilio alternative that you said is, because like I said, it started out for me on my screen, so I can't see it. Might be because you put in an actual link instead of the actual name of the company. So if you just let me know that, that'd be great. Signal wire. Thanks. I'll just put that on screen for everyone. So this was the Twilio alternative that was mentioned. To be honest, I think that would be it. At least if I was going to build this out, like building the infrastructure for this would be very, very quick with Pulumi or Terraform. The actual bit's going to take time. Honestly, for me, is going to be the UI part of this. Is getting the UI to work with the API and Cognito. I've never used Cognito before, but I think that's where the direction I want to go. So that trio of things setting up would be fun to play with to start off with. And then the other bit that will take me some time is the integration with Stripe, because I've never integrated with Stripe before. And I'd have to see exactly how that goes. Be interested to know if you use Stripe or something else to do your billing. I'm going to assume name is Talented on the Twitch chat. But yeah. What's the last thing I was going to say? The only other thing that I would even possibly remotely consider doing, but I wouldn't do until I had a decent amount of paying customers, would be what I would do in front of the UI and the API gateway. And that's, I would put AWS Global Accelerator here as well, just to optimize some of the access for everyone. So if you are down in like the far reaches of South America, then you jump onto AWS's network at the earliest possible point and then go from there. But to be honest, that's not something I would implement straight away. That's something I would implement when I know I've got got customers down in that location, and that's where they're accessing it from and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that is how I would go through and design my serverless SaaS solution. That does DNS, HTTP monitoring, and in the future goes and does architecture monitoring, incidents post-mortem, full custom rule sets. Interesting. Yep. So yeah, I'm just having a look around. So if we look back to my original requirements, we've got payments covered with Stripe. We've just gone through the low cost aspect of this. So gone through all the costings. I'll go and double check it, but like I said, I think this is only like $150 a month, which is fine for me. And the multi-region aspect is covered based predominantly on the architecture choices that we're making. So yeah, I'll stick around for a couple more minutes. If there's any more questions or not, I'll stick around for the next minute or so to answer any questions that you guys might have. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining. It's much appreciated to see you all. Talented as well. I'm interested to check your SaaS out. You should be able to find my Twitter handle either on Twitch or on my YouTube page. If you just send me a link on there, I don't think the link is going to send in chat. I think I turned some moderation settings on to stop links. But yeah, if you just send me a message on Twitter or something with your SaaS, I'll definitely check it out. I'm interested to see how other people are building their stuff as well. Alrighty then. Since it seems to be all quiet and it doesn't seem to be any questions, I'm going to call it a day. Should probably go and say hello to my wife. And yeah, thank you very much for everyone. Some good questions and stuff. And I will see you again hopefully next week. I will confirm by the end of the week whether it's going to be on. You'll be able to see the schedule live on YouTube as well. I always publish a little thing on YouTube to say